In the name of the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you so much, Lord, for this opportunity to gather here together to pray with you. Help us to remember that prayer is his forge of love, this place where we can find ourselves being molded and shaped and hammered into the people that you want us to be. Help us to find that transformation where we can see the people around us as human beings. We can see them as flawed individuals, but people who really need our help, really need our love. Help us to see like you, to hear like you, especially to love like you in all the different moments and situations of our lives, especially with the people we find it most difficult to love, most difficult to be with. Help us, Mother Mary, to follow your Son in the same way you followed him. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Beginning is now, never shall be, world without end. Amen. Okay, so last week we started a new theme. So we went into a new topic, and it was prayer as a forge of love. We talked about how prayer is kind of like this place where, if you've ever seen a blacksmith's forge, it's like where it's really super hot. The middle of winter, it's always the perfect place to be. Middle of summer, not so much, but it's really hot. But that heat coming from the fire makes the metal soft, so that metal can then be molded and shaped into the instrument that's called to be. Whether it be a horseshoe, whether it be a sword, whether it be a spear, whether it be, back in the old days, it was just, everything was made in the forge, basically. So we were talking about how prayer is kind of like that. It's this place where God purifies us and strengthens us and shapes us with the heat of his love. So we go into prayer, we experience how much he loves us. That makes us soft enough, softens our heart so that our heart can be shaped into what it's called to be shaped into. So this week we want to expand a little bit on that. We want to talk about this transformation that God wants to do in us. And it's not just any old transformation that's supposed to take place in prayer. God knows what he's doing. He has an intention, he has a goal in mind. And that goal, this forge of love that he's got, this hot burning fire heated up by Jesus' love, I really love that image. It's like it transforms our heart into his. And this is the whole idea of it. We never lose our individuality, but Jesus in a certain way wants to give us a heart transplant. Wants to give us a new heart, a heart which can understand and believe and especially love like his. That's what he's looking for in us. So we can live like he lived, see as he sees, hear as he hears, but especially love as he loves. So we're going to see a little bit like how that process happens today. We're going to look at a passage from John chapter 9. So we're going to go into the Gospel of John. We're going to look for chapter 9. I'm going to talk about the whole chapter. I don't know if we're going to have a chance to read the whole chapter, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. So I'm going to have to try and be fast because there's a lot of verses in that chapter. There's 41 verses. But the actual process is really important to this chapter. So we're going to start with the first 7 verses. So one of the ones who are online, when you've got it, so Madeline, you look it up. Oh, Katarina's got it. Very good. Oh. So Katarina, if you just want to start with verses 1 to 7.
Yep. Okay. A man, I'll wait till everyone's ready. Yep. A man born blind received sight. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see.
Perfect. So this is where we're going to start with. So this is a cure of a man who's born blind. And it starts with a demonstration of the disciples basically seeing how everyone else sees. So they walk past a blind man, and they're walking past a blind man and say, Jesus, this guy here, he's blind. He's been blind from birth. Everyone tells us he's been blind from birth. So, who sinned? Was it him or was it his parents? So hopefully that sounds a little bit harsh to us. But this was a common belief at the time. Basically, if something bad happened to you, if you suffered, it was because of sin. Either your sin or the sin of your parents or the sin of your grandparents, whatever it was, where you had a disease, you had a sickness, you had a bit of bad luck, you had a natural disaster, you had economic failures, your children didn't turn out so well, it was blamed on your sin. And this was so widespread that the disciples didn't even doubt it. They just assumed if something bad happened, it was sin's fault. So they were just trying to identify who it was that sinned. Was it the man or was it his parents? Seeing he's blind from birth, they're thinking probably should be his parents, because he's not even old enough to have sinned when he was first blind. So probably his parents, but maybe God foresaw the man's sins and then punished him in advance. I remember one of our priests, he was a doctor, and he was sharing that one time there's actually an element of truth in the connection of sin to suffering. In that when you work in an emergency department, I'm looking at a doctor here, when you work in an emergency department, especially on Friday and Saturday nights, sometimes you see the physical consequences of sin. So you see people who've done very stupid things that they shouldn't have done, and they're suffering. Or people around them who suffer because of their sins. So when you see drinking-related accidents, when you hear about the lives that are destroyed through pornography, for example, not just the people themselves who do the sin, but the people around them, you see that sin actually has negative consequences. It actually has a negative effect on the people around them. But it would be a fallacy, it would be untrue to say that all bad things are caused by sin. And this is what Jesus is saying here. But the beautiful thing about this is Jesus doesn't even talk about the man's sin. You see what he responds. He says, neither he nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that the works of God might be revealed in him. So we see Jesus' heart coming out here. This is the heart that he wants us to have. He doesn't see someone suffering because of sin. He sees an opportunity to reveal God's works through healing him. Many times when I go to prayer, I come with like a particular way of viewing a person. I come to prayer and go, oh, that person there, God, they really, really frustrate me. They really bug me. It's like, how can I possibly live with this person? And I think Jesus shows me how to see the people in a different way. He tries to gently lead me away from judging people to helping them instead. So sometimes you see someone who's a bit rude, or someone who's always arguing with you. No matter what you say, they always make it into an argument. Or you see someone who's very clumsy, I think they would learn after a while not to put the thing there, kind of thing. Or you see someone who's very forgetful, and they're constantly forgetting again and again and again. And you kind of come there with your judgment, and in prayer, God shows you something, Jesus shows you something different from that person. I often find him telling me, if you only saw their history, if you only knew what they went through in their upbringing, if you only knew some of the traumas that they lived in their life, you would see them in a different way. Now, the founder of our community, Verbum Day, Father Jaime Bonnet, he used to say, I've been preaching retreats, I've been hearing confessions on 5 continents. I've heard confessions of drug dealers, I've heard confessions of not just drug dealers, but the drug lords in Colombia and stuff. And he's saying, I've never met an evil person, but I have met many, many ignorant people. Many, many people who don't know right from wrong. So we as people who've come to know Jesus, who've been brought up well, who've learned what right is and what wrong is, should be working hard to help people overcome that ignorance rather than judging them. In other words, we need to help them to be cured of their blindness. That's what ignorance really is. It's like a moral blindness. not being able to see. So often our natural temptation and the way that society teaches us is to judge people, to blame them for all that's happened in their life. Oh, that drug addict who's taking drugs. Look at the damage he's doing to himself and to the world around him. Look at that prostitute. Oh, how did she manage to do that kind of thing? Look at that criminal he's been, keeps on going back to jail. Again, it doesn't even seem to learn the lesson. Oh, look at that person who's bummed, who's unemployed. It's like, get a job, you lazy person, kind of thing. It's like, many times this is like the attitude that we pick up. Is like our natural, what seems to be our natural way of seeing people in society is to judge them. Jesus, through his words, through this love that he transmits to us in prayer, he wants to transform that. So instead of judging people, or even instead of just talking about them, so the disciples are going, oh, look at this guy, you know, he's is it him or is his parents who sinned? Instead of just talking about them, he wants us to feel this great desire to transform their lives. A transformation of our heart can help those lives to be transformed. They can have a huge effect on many lives. And that's what we're going to see in the rest of this chapter. Jesus, little by little, helps the blind man to see, not just physically, but spiritually. He's going to help him to see the world in a totally different way. So the physical cure is a guide to how the spiritual cure is going to take place. So I don't know if you noticed the lovely way that Jesus cured this man. So he spat on the ground, mixed his spit with the dirt, made it into mud, put some mud on his eyes. Doesn't sound very hygienic, doesn't sound particularly medicinal. He almost seems to be obscuring the guy's vision, you know, throwing mud in his eyes, making it worse. Then he sends a man off to the pool of Siloam, whatever you want to call it, to wash the mud out of his eyes. And then the man can see. It's like, it sounds very simple in a certain way, but there's like there's a pattern to it. So that's the physical cure of the man. We're going to look now at the spiritual cure of the man, how he's spiritually cured. So I'm going to start with verses 8 to 17. So get a volunteer from online to read 8 to 17. Who wants to read it?
I'll do it if no one else wants to.
Okay, very good. You go ahead.
So 8 to 17. The neighbours and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some were saying, it is he. Others were saying, no, but it is someone like him. He kept saying, I am the man. But they kept asking him, then how were your eyes opened? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. Then I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. And then I've got the Pharisees investigate the healing. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened. He said, he is a prophet.
It's an interesting story. You see that the effects of this cure has effects on the people around him. So first thing, that the people who are affected are his neighbours, the people alongside him, go, wait a minute, something's happened here. Something's a bit different. They notice that the man who's been blind from his birth now can see. They notice something different. The transformation is so big, in fact, they're not even sure it's him. You sure that's him? I don't know. It looks like him. I think it's just someone who looks like similar. Maybe he's got an identical twin or something. It's like he has to actually tell them, yeah, it's me. I'm the one. I'm the one who is blind from birth. So ask him what happened. He tells them what Jesus did. Then they bring him along to the Pharisees. And they go, wow, something special's happened here. So let's bring him along to the religious experts, the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, they start to question him. He basically tells the same story. And then they start to argue among themselves, the Pharisees, because they can't work out whether Jesus is actually holy or not. First thing they go, wait a minute, he did this on the Sabbath. You can't do it on the Sabbath, that's wrong. But then they go, but wait a minute, he's done like an amazing miracle. How could he be like not be a holy person if he's done an amazing miracle? So they can't work it out. In the end, they ask the man what he thinks, and the man says, well, he's a prophet. So let's continue on. The story gets very interesting. So, Madeline, you had your hand up before to read. Do you want to read 18 to 25 for me? Okay. Yeah, you're muted anyway at the moment. So.
Sorry, I thought we were reading Ezekiel, so I'm lost as to where we're
Okay,
reading
read
from.
the Gospel of John, chapter 9. So, you're going to go to John, chapter 9.
Yep, I can. I'll be quick. Sorry. John chapter 9, verses
18 to 25.
Immediately something like scales fell from his eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking food, he recovered his strength.
Wrong chapter, yeah.
Chapter 9? Oh,
John chapter 9.
I'm sorry. I thought I was in John. Obviously, it went to Acts because I must have turned too many pages.
It's another blind person getting cured by the sound of it.
There was quite a few in Ezekiel as well. After all this, the Jews refused to believe that the man had been blind and had recovered his sight. So they called his parents and asked them, "Is this your son? You say that he was born blind. How is it that he now sees?" The parents answered, "We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind. But how it is that he now sees, we do not know, neither do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is old enough. Let him speak for himself." The parents said this because they feared the Jews, who had already agreed that whoever confessed Jesus to be the Messiah was to be put out of the synagogue. That is why his parents said, "He is old enough, ask him." So a second time the Pharisees called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." He replied, "I do not know whether he is a sinner or not. I only know that I was blind and I now see."
Okay, is that up to 25?
Well, that's up to, yep, that's including 25.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so the Pharisees come along. They're going, okay, we need to investigate this more. So they bring in the parents. They find the parents of the blind man, and they ask him. And the parents, they're a little bit scared of the Pharisees. So they just kind of say, yeah, well, look, he was definitely blind from birth. We know that he was blind from birth. And we know that he can see, but we don't know how it happened. Because they're too scared to actually say it was Jesus. Because anyone who says it's Jesus gets booted out of the temple. So the Pharisees get the man back in. And what do they say to the man? They say, "Give glory to God. We're satisfied this man is a sinner. We just found out for sure that he's cured this person. So haven't got any new evidence against Jesus, but they've just decided, no, we don't really like him. So let's see." Anyway, the man isn't convinced. When they ask him what happens, he tells them again. And then he says, "Oh, do you want to be the disciples of Jesus as well?" So imagine he's like, this man is understanding little by little, more and more clearly, despite the fact that he's kind of getting a little bit persecuted by the Pharisees. He's understanding more and more who Jesus is. And he's even inviting the other people to be disciples of Jesus, the Pharisees, despite the fact that they're like the big bosses kind of thing. So, okay. So let's keep on going. So if someone wants to read verses 26 through to 34. So Grace, would you be able to do that?
Right here, yep. 26 to 34. But what did he do? They asked. How did he heal you? Look, the man exclaimed, I told you once, didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they cursed him and said, you are his disciple, but we are the disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. Why, that's very strange, the man replied. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it. You were born a total sinner, they answered. Are you trying to teach us? And they threw him out of the synagogue.
Okay, so you got this, the Pharisees are getting all upset. So they're actually abusing him, saying, how can you say we should be disciples of Jesus? We're disciples of Moses. We're much better than Jesus. And then he shows them how illogical their argument is by saying, look, he's obviously a good man because he cured me. Everyone knows that only good people can do cures like this. So God has to be acting through them. That provokes them so much, and then they attack him personally. These are good Bible-believing Christians, or I shouldn't say Christians, good Bible-believing religious people. And they remind him that he's been a sinner ever since his birth, and then they expel him from the synagogue. So throw him out. So, poor old man, he's going through all these difficulties, going through all these struggles. What happens then? It's such an interesting kind of conversation they're having here. Okay, so I'm going to finish this off. So if someone just wants to read the last from 35 to 41, one of the ones online.
I can, it's fine.
Okay, Madeline, you go for it.
Jesus heard that they had driven him out. He found him and said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, who is he, sir? Tell me so I can believe in him. Jesus said, you have seen him and he is speaking to you. He said, Lord, I believe, and fell on his knees in worship. Jesus said, I came into this world to judge so that those who do not see shall see, and those who see shall become blind. Some Pharisees who stood by him heard this and asked him, so we are blind? And Jesus answered, if you were blind, you would not be guilty. Now that you claim we see, your guilt remains.
So Jesus finds the man. He goes and finds the man. He heard he got booted out of the temple, the poor guy. The synagogue. And then he finds him. Remember, the man hasn't actually seen Jesus yet. So he got cured. He went and washed his eyes. He's all cured, but he hasn't actually seen Jesus. So Jesus comes and finds him. Jesus says, okay, do you believe in the Son of Man? Do you believe in the person who cured him? He said, who is he? Tell me. Look at his face. He says, tell me who he is so that I can believe him. And then Jesus says, it's me. I'm right here in front of you. And the man says, Lord, I believe. He's got to that point now where he's like totally believing in Jesus, to the point where he's worshiping Jesus. Very rarely actually people get to that point where they can actually go, okay, this man here is actually God. So a lot of them can kind of see he's a holy man. He's good. Even they might even kind of get to the point where they think he's the Messiah. But to the fact where they actually believe that he's God, this man has got there already. See that work. And the funny thing about it is that it's kind of like there's these two dynamisms here. You've got the process of the man and the process of the Pharisees. Pharisees keep on getting worse and worse. The man keeps on getting better and better, kind of at the same time. With each step of the journey, the man who is blind is able to see more, because he's getting closer and closer to Jesus. Even he gets challenged more from the Pharisees. The Pharisees keep on questioning him more, but his faith keeps on growing. Rather than falling apart, it actually keeps on taking steps. Our faith can actually grow in adversity if there's that constant love of Jesus there. If we remain in that forge, it's kind of like those difficult moments, those challenges. They're like those hammer blows that we were talking about last week in the forge. They actually make the steel harder, make the steel more able to do what it's called to do. Like the blacksmith beating the metal into shape. So those difficulties, that rejection that he's suffering from the Pharisees, actually makes him stronger in his faith. And it's the same with us. The hammer blows of persecution, of sickness, of failure, which would smash us if we weren't surrounded by the heat of Jesus' love. Instead, they shape us to be more like him. So you see the journey of the man. At the beginning, he's sitting there, he's blind, but more or less unmolested. Everyone kind of goes, "Oh, poor blind guy, we'll give him some coins." And like, he has his place. He's not a very good place, but everyone knows who he is. They just assume that he's always going to be like that forever. When he first starts to see, he gets questioned because something's changed. Something's different. He's starting to take a step. It's like us. When we start taking steps in our faith, a lot of the time people start to question us and go, "Wait a minute, what's going on here? You're acting a bit differently. You're not the same as you were before." So the same with the man. It's like he testifies to what Jesus did for him, firstly to his neighbors and his family. The more he testifies, the more he gets persecuted. Poor guy. So they bring him to the Pharisees. He testifies to them. Little by little, that formerly blind man grows closer and closer to Jesus, while the Pharisees draw further and further away. So his advantage is that he's constantly growing in that faith in Jesus. He's constantly feeling that love from Jesus that he felt through that healing. They're constantly getting further away from Jesus because of that judgment that they're putting on Jesus and the judgment that they're putting on the man as a sinner. So you see the blind man gradually grows. First he sees Jesus as this guy who's a bit of a miracle worker. Then he understands he's a prophet. Then he's trying to make people into his disciples. And eventually he gets to the point where he's worshipping Jesus. Even when they're attacking him, they're making fun of him, he's not worried about defending himself. He's defending Jesus. He proclaims to them that Jesus is from God. He does God's will. There's this deep transformation happening in this man. And as a reward for his efforts, he gets expelled from the synagogue. More persecution. But that's when he actually really gets to the fullness of the faith as well. So Jesus takes a man who's kind of on the margins of society, and he turns him into an apostle, into an evangelist, able to share his faith. And you see him, now he's not even worried about getting expelled, because now he can see. Not just physically, but he can see spiritually. He can really see. He's had an experience of God, a deep experience of God. And then he's seeing the Pharisees as people who he wants to reach out to, people who he wants to convince to become followers of Christ as well. And the Pharisees' process is kind of the reverse. They begin being part of like a central part of the religious establishment, the ones who see themselves as kind of being holy and set apart or consecrated to God. That's actually what Pharisee means. If you look for the actual meaning of Pharisee, it means the ones who are kind of set apart. So they understood themselves as we're these holy ones who are set apart, we stay away from the impure world and the people who are not as good as us, kind of thing. And I think that their interpretation of the law is the correct one. And then they're judging anyone else who's not meeting their standards. And that makes it difficult for them to see that Jesus is actually coming along and inviting them to a deeper faith, a deeper experience of God. So they find like this impermeable barrier to believing in him just because he cured a man on the Sabbath, for example. He's broken one of their rules. So how could a sinner produce signs like he produced? But he did. And that's why sometimes it can be the same sort of problems with us as well. A difficulty to actually believe fully in Jesus. because sometimes it clashes with our own long-held beliefs and the prejudices and the assumptions that we have. So you see, the Pharisees, they're not able to get to that point. They've had confirmation from the parents, and they still come back and say, "Oh, we're sure that this man's a sinner." It's kind of like this resistance, this hardness in them. That hardness is because they're not in the forge. They're not in that experience of God's love, which makes them soft and moldable. So when the formerly blind man starts to defend Jesus, they start to attack him. They don't just attack his arguments, they attack him as a person, say, you're a terrible sinner because you've been blind from birth. And then when they hear Jesus say, "It is for judgment that I've come into the world, so that those without sight may see, and those with sight may become blind," some of the Pharisees actually say, "Oh, so we're blind, are we?" And Jesus makes in the point at the end that if they were blind like the other man, in a way that was pure ignorance, that wouldn't be a problem. That wouldn't be a source of guilt. Problem is when we actually choose to be blind. We choose to shut ourselves off to other people. We choose to judge other people. In other words, they're not really ignorant. They're actually refusing to come to knowledge. They're choosing to be blind. So Jesus says, "I'm the light of the world" at the beginning. When that light's in our heart, we're able to judge, we're able to recognize what is right and wrong, we're able to see as Jesus sees. Our hearts are able to love as Jesus loves. But the more that we kind of reject that light, the more that the truth gets harder to find, and the more we start to justify our own arguments, even in the face of the evidence to the contrary. So Jesus invites us to open ourselves up to that transformation, to really desire that transformation, to really desire to love other people the way that he loves. And I think this is hard for us because sometimes we prefer to stay in our judgments. We prefer to just keep on seeing the people around us in the way we've always seen. And as Christians, as Catholics, a bit like the Pharisees, we can have a temptation to separate ourselves from the rest of humanity, kind of like creating us versus them mentality. And they reject what I say, so I know where they're going, kind of thing. They're all sinners, and they're going to be sinners forever. They're going to be blind for life. And I can kind of be content, kind of sitting up in my ivory tower. And sometimes this happens. It's like we kind of think, I don't think those people really want to see. I don't think they have a desire for God. So I think they prefer to stay blind, and I almost think that their blindness is better for them, because then they don't have to worry about what the church teaches about what they should and shouldn't do. So I'm just going to leave them in their blindness, and I don't have to do anything. When we choose to give up on certain people, it actually has advantages for us, in that it means we don't have to put in the effort to evangelize them. It also means we can kind of set ourselves as above them, as set apart, as chosen, as Pharisees. And that allows us to resist the call to actually change as well. Because often when people don't want to accept what we say about God, it's because they don't see it in us. We're not very convincing. They kind of look at us and go, well, they don't look particularly Christian, so why should I actually believe in what they're saying? They can see through our inauthenticity. So sometimes we're going to encounter people like Jesus did in the Pharisees, but he kept on trying. He kept on trying to reach out to them and get them to change. What will make the difference is when we can actually lead people into prayer, into that forge of love, like this man. And that hot heat of Jesus' love that burns away our spiritual pride, our spiritual laziness, that tendency to judge without really seeing, that desire to want to place ourselves on a pedestal sometimes as well. We need to be the first ones to do that. We need to place ourselves into that forge. And maybe one of the questions we can ask in our prayer is, where does Jesus' light still need to penetrate in our life? Where does our heart still need to be a bit softened? We need to kind of melt our hearts with Jesus in prayer and give him the space and the time to work, so that we can start to see other brothers and sisters with compassion. We can start to see them as Jesus sees them, with the mercy, with the longing that they can see and act and hear and love like him as well. So I'm going to leave you with some questions for your prayer. So, share these ones out already. So, questions for our prayer will be, so from the first 7 verses, John 9, 1-7, who are the people who I tend to judge? Take these people to Jesus in prayer now. What is he saying to you about them? How is he inviting you to see them in a different way? Secondly, second question, the blind man is gradually led to full faith in Jesus. Have you passed through a similar transformation? How has your relationship with Jesus, your prayer life, helped you on your journey? And the third one is about the Pharisees. So the Pharisees refused to believe in Jesus despite the obvious evidence that he's doing good. What blocks you from seeing things with Jesus' eyes and loving with Jesus' heart? Where does your heart still need to be transformed? So we can stop our recording there.